Assalamu alaikum dear students, welcome to a new video of mine with a new lecture on a new topic, and today's topic is P.B. Shelley as a lyricist. But before starting the topic, let me clarify that this topic has been discussed by us in the past as well, and today's lecture will be a remake of the previous topic, right? So let's begin our lecture. Before going into details, what are the chief characteristics of, main features of P.B. Shelley's lyricism? Let's have an introduction to this topic. It is believed that P.B. Shelley is one of the finest lyricists in the entire range of English literature. He produced some of the best lyrics in 19th century Romantic English poetry. Shelley actually belonged to the latter part of 19th century Romantic age, and as a junior Romantic poet, he produced some of the best lyrical poetry in this age, and he is remembered for his many shorter lyrical poems. For example, Music When Soft Voices Die, Ode to the West Wind, to the Skylark, To Night. These are some of the memorable shorter lyrics of P.B. Shelley, right? So we are going to take them up one by one and discuss what are the chief and major characteristics of P.B. Shelley's lyricism. We are going to discuss the main aspects of Shelley's lyrical poetry, right? Before discussing those characteristics, let me recite one of the shorter lyrics written by P.B. Shelley, and the name of that shorter lyric is Music When Soft Voices Die. Music when soft voices die, vibrates in the memory, odors when sweet violets sicken, live within the sense they quicken, rose leaves when the rose is dead, are heaped for beloved's bed, and so thy thoughts, when thou art gone, love itself shall slumber on. What a beautiful shorter lyrical poem by P.B. Shelley. It has all the basic qualities of Shelley's lyrical impulse, right? There are at least 5 major characteristics of Shelley's lyrical poetry. Rather, I should say, take up any type of lyrical poetry, these 5 characteristics would be there. Let's discuss these 5 lyrical qualities. Number 1 is simplicity of language. Number 2 is spontaneity. Number 3 is intensity of emotions. Number 4 is music. Number 5 is sincerity of heart. And if you study closely the lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley, then you will clearly feel that all these 5 major characteristics are there, abundantly there, very prominently there in the poetry of P.B. Shelley. So let's discuss all these major characteristics of P.B. Shelley's lyrical impulse or lyrical poetry in today's lecture. Number 1 is simplicity of language. This is one of the most important characteristic. This is one of the important features of any type of lyrical poetry, and it is also there, very prominently there in the poetry of P.B. Shelley. If you read any of his lyrical poetry, the lyrical poem, shorter lyrical poem that I have recited in the beginning of today's lecture, it also contains this remarkable simplicity of language in it. It is highly simple kind of a poem. Its diction, its language is closer to the common speech. Even a layman, even an ordinary man, as far as dictionary meaning is concerned, he can understand the dictionary meaning of all the words used by Shelley in this shorter lyric. If you talk about his best poem, one of the best poems, which is Ode to the West Wind, in this Ode to the West Wind, P.B. Shelley again uses absolutely simple language, such a simple language that it is as simple as ABC. Even a layman, even a common man can understand it, right? Why? Now the question rises, why P.B. Shelley uses absolutely simple language in the world of his lyrical poetry? Because his purpose is communication of his thoughts, ideas, feelings and emotions to the readers. His purpose is not to mystify the readers. His purpose is to communicate successfully his thoughts, his feelings to the readers. He wants his readers to understand him fully and completely. For this particular purpose, he does not use high-flown language. He does not use sublime language. He does not make use of complex and ambiguous language. Rather, instead of that, he uses absolutely simple kind of language in his poetry. So this simplicity is part and parcel of the lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley. So he wants his readers to understand his emotions, his ideas, his thoughts fully and completely without any ambiguity, which is why he uses absolutely simple kind of language. So this is the first important characteristic of Shelley's lyrical poetry. Second important characteristic of Shelley's lyrical poetry is intensity of emotions, right? All great lyrics in the entire range of English literature, they are based upon intense emotions and passions. This is true of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry as well. P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry is full of intense kind of emotions, intense kind of passions in his poetry. All his poems contain this intensity of emotions, right? Take the example of his poem Ode to the West Wind. The very beginning of the poem reflects or shows the intensity of emotions, which is the hallmark of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry. For example, the opening of the Ode to the West Wind is, "O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being." Now this very word "O," which he uses in the opening of this poem, shows the intensity of emotion, the intensity of thought, the intensity of passion that Shelley is expressing through this poem. And there are countless other examples in his poetry which reflect his intensity of his emotions. Take the example of his poem Music When Soft Voices Die. In this poem, in order to express his single emotion of love to the readers, he uses at least 4 or 5 similes, 4 or 5 analogies, 4 or 5 comparisons in order to elaborate, in order to communicate intensely his passionate emotion of love to the reader. First of all, he compares his intense emotions to fragrance, to flowers and to beautiful song and all these things in this shorter lyric. So in this way, P.B. Shelley communicates his intensest, most emotion of love that he has for his beloved to the reader through the use of 4 or 5 similes. So this use of 4 or 5 similes clearly indicate that P.B. Shelley has an intense emotion of love for his beloved, which he wants to communicate in an intensest, most manner to the reader, for which he uses 4 or 5 similes. So this is an example of intensity of emotions in the lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley. Next important characteristic of lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley is spontaneity. P.B. Shelley uses absolutely spontaneous kind of language in his poetry. Not only language, but overall there is spontaneity in his poetry. Not only his language is spontaneous, but at the same time his thought, his feeling, his emotions are also very spontaneous in nature. Let me clarify, what do we mean by spontaneous? Spontaneous means without any pre-planning, without any pre-thinking, right? Shelley does not pre-think the content of his poetry, the language of his poetry when he writes his lyrical poetry, right? He writes as thoughts, ideas, feelings come in his mind coupled with a type of language. He writes them out naturally. While talking about this spontaneity in the poetry of P.B. Shelley, one of the critics very famously said that Shelley exhales lyrics as flower exhales fragrance. Or in other words, Shelley writes lyrics as flower exhales fragrance. This comment of the critic amply reflects that there is remarkable spontaneity, extraordinary spontaneity found in the poetry of P.B. Shelley, which is nowhere to be found in any other lyrical poet of entire range of English literature. So there is this remarkable spontaneity in the world of his poetry. Why this spontaneity is there? Because Shelley wants to remain honest to his emotions, to his thought, to his feelings, to his emotions, and the diction of his poetry as well. Which is why he expresses his thoughts and feelings and emotions in a spontaneous manner, without much of the planning, without much of the polish, without much of the trimming of either of the thought or of the diction of his lyrical poetry. So this is another important characteristic of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry. Next important characteristic of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry is music. There is a lot of music in the poetry of P.B. Shelley. P.B. Shelley's poetry is highly musical and highly rhythmical in nature. Listening to or reading P.B. Shelley is like listening to a clear stream flowing on a bed of pebble in a shiny weather, right? In a sunshine. Suppose you are sitting by a beautiful stream in which crystal clear water is flowing over a bed of pebbles. When it flows, it creates a kind of a rhythmical music. Same sort of a rhythmical music is there in the lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley. For example, take the example of his poem Ode to the West Wind. In the very opening of the poem Ode to the West Wind, P.B. Shelley uses alliteration, a figure of speech in which a poet tries to create a sort of a music through consonantal sounds. For example, the opening of Ode to the West Wind is, O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being. Now, there is WWW repetition in the very first line of this particular beautiful poem by P.B. Shelley. So, now through this wild west wind sound, consonantal sound of W, he tries to create music. So, his music is always there accompanying his intense emotions and passions, and his simple language, his spontaneity. It always helps P.B. Shelley to communicate his ideas, thoughts, feelings and emotions not only in a simple manner but also in a musical and rhythmical manner. So which is why he uses music and rhythm in the world of his poetry, in the world of his lyrical poetry, in order to communicate effectively. So this is another important example of or feature of the lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley. Next important characteristic of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry is sincerity of heart. Rather, I should say this not only is there in the poetry of P.B. Shelley, but it is also there in any other lyrical poet in the English literature. Take up any lyrical poetry, great lyrical poetry, good lyrical poetry, it would have sincerity of heart. And it is also there in the poetry of P.B. Shelley. When you read P.B. Shelley's poetry, lyrical poems, you clearly feel that P.B. Shelley is speaking from his heart, right? Whatever is uttered by, written by, communicated by P.B. Shelley through his lyrical poems, it comes straight out of his heart, without any tampering with it, without any additions and deductions from it, without any alteration in it. He communicates his ideas, thoughts, feelings and emotions to the reader honestly. Ideas and thoughts and feelings come straight out of his heart and go straight into the heart and mind of the reader, which is why his lyrical poetry is so effective, so impactful upon the mind and heart of the reader. It leaves a lasting impression upon the heart of the emotional and spiritual world of the readers, right? This is one of the most important qualities of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry, that it is based upon sincerity of heart. So this is another important characteristic of P.B. Shelley's lyrical poetry. I hope you have listened to me very carefully and you have understood and digested whatever I told you about the main features of the lyrical poetry of P.B. Shelley. So this is it for today. See you in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz.